Welcome back everyone to another reaction video. Well, you guys seem to really enjoy the video that we took a look at from Serious History, so I thought we would go back to them today and take a look at this one. This sounds pretty interesting. Extreme Stories of Betrayal from History. We've looked at revenge stories, and we will also be looking at part 2 of their revenge stories. But today, this is stories of betrayal. Betrayal is a part of history, and it's especially painful when you are betrayed, because betrayal kind of by definition means that the person doing it is someone that you thought at one time was on your side. So this should be an interesting one. It's another unique lens through which we can view stories of history. So I'll put the link in the description so you can check out this video, but all of Serious History's content without my commentary. Let's dive into this one.
This video is brought to you by World of Warships. Today, we're going over some of the most extreme stories of betrayal from human history. Number 1, Ricimer. Okay, we're kicking things off with a betrayal so extreme that it caused the actual fall of Rome. It's the 5th century AD, and the once mighty Rome has seen better days. Collapsing in on its own immense size, the Roman Empire split into 2 separate empires in 395 CE. The Eastern...
And they had been laying the groundwork for something like this to happen by the fact that by the time you get to right around the year 200 or so, when you have the 5 good emperors, as they called them, which ends with Marcus Aurelius, because then the next emperor after him is Commodus, who is not a good emperor. You start to see the sharing of power by these emperors, and you start to see co-emperors at times. Marcus Aurelius actually makes Commodus his co-emperor, despite what you see in the movie Gladiator, where he says Commodus will not become emperor. In real life, Marcus Aurelius actually made his son Commodus his co-emperor. And you see it again, the 2 guys in Gladiator 2, where you have Caracalla and his brother, Geta, are co-emperors. And eventually you end up with 4 emperors, because they're going to have an Augustus and a Caesar in both the West and the East. And so there was this recognition of sharing power, but it also helped to pass along that power to your successor by making your successor an emperor while you're still alive. And so there's a lot of groundwork being laid for this split.
Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, seemed to take the breakup well and thrived for another 1,000 years or so, while the Western Roman Empire... they were struggling to keep it together. See, Rome was like that beautiful neighborhood that was once a great place to live that went to complete after decades of corruption and bad leadership.
Yeah, in fact, by the late period of the Western Roman Empire, Rome's not even the capital anymore. They move it to Ravenna.
Germanic tribes like the Visigoths and Vandals were constantly invading around the borders of the empire, and without the political stability to field a proper army to defend itself, late Roman emperors were forced to rely on local barbarian generals and their armies of mercenaries. These barbarian generals grew in power and influence, and eventually the emperor was nothing more than a puppet figure to these warlords.
Yeah, and remember that the idea of a barbarian, don't mistake that for them being unorganized and uneducated, just stupid warrior, like big dumb warriors with a club. Barbarian just meant anyone who was outside of the Roman Empire. And they were very educated at times, they modeled a lot of their own tactics on the Romans, had their own systems of government and hierarchy and everything.
To make things worse, Rome was hit with a wave of massive inflation that devalued its currency and made everything so much more expensive for its citizens who were already struggling to get by. The sacking of Rome by the Vandals in 455 CE seemed like the final death blow to the once mighty empire. But out of the rubble emerged a man who saw the chaos as an opportunity to seize power for himself. This man was named Ricimer, and he was going to do it all with the help of his best friend, Majorian. Ricimer and Majorian were friends forged in war. They fought side by side in numerous battles against barbaric invaders and rose through the ranks together. Both grew to become respected commanders, and many throughout Rome began wishing for one of them to take control of the empire and guide it back to greatness. And here's the thing. They both wanted that power, so much so that they worked together to orchestrate a coup against the Emperor Avitus, who they...
Look at a list, in fact, let's do this. Let's look at a list of the Roman emperors during this time period and how they ended their reigns. So we've got the good emperors as they're known here. You've got Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius, and then Lucius Verus actually was another co-emperor at the same time as Marcus Aurelius for the last part of the reign. I think 8 years they were co-emperors together. So then after Commodus, you have the year of the 5 emperors. So Pertinax, murdered by the Praetorian Guard, who then auction off the empire to Didius Julianus, who is then killed on orders of the Senate at the behest of Septimus Severus, who becomes emperor. He dies of natural causes. But then Caracalla, murdered by a soldier at the instigation of Macrinus, which, you see that those characters in Gladiator 2, even though they're not necessarily exactly how they happened. Of course, Gita is murdered on orders of his brother Caracalla. Macrinus is executed. He actually never enters Rome while he's emperor. He's executed during a revolt. The next emperor after him is caught in a fight and executed. Then you have one murdered by the Praetorian Guard, lynched by mutinous troops. So you see what I'm talking about here. All right, now we get into the next ones. First commoner to become emperor, murdered by his men during a siege, committed suicide, killed outside Carthage in battle against an army loyal to Maximus, tortured and murdered by the Praetorian Guard, died during campaign, possibly in a murder plot, killed at the Battle of Verona, murdered by the Praetorian Guard, killed in battle, murdered by his own troops, died of plague or murdered. See what I mean? Nobody's living to old age of these emperors. You want to talk about why the Roman Empire failed? Look at their leadership. Look how often they had turnover. Imagine how strong the Roman Empire was that it could withstand this kind of violence among its leaders for generations and continue on for hundreds of years after this happened.
Aethon was doing a horrible job. With Avitus gone, Ricimer became the most powerful man in Rome. But there was one problem. Ricimer wasn't technically Roman. He was actually one of those barbarian generals mentioned before. And although Ricimer was the more decorated commander with better qualifications when compared to Majorian, not being Roman made him ineligible for the throne. So he decided...
Yeah, but everything's a rule until it's not, right? It used to be you had to be of a certain class to reach a certain level, and then they changed that. You had to be a certain age to be a consul until they made Octavian a consul. I mean, every rule is a rule until it's not.
He would instead get his best friend promoted to emperor and simply influence Majorian's decisions and rule over Rome from the shadows. Majorian becomes emperor in December of 457, and Ricimer could not have been more happy. That is, until Majorian started doing a little too well. See, Majorian actually turned out to be a phenomenal emperor, and he had his own ideas on how to make Rome
great again. Well, he was hoping he would fail, and he didn't, and that's no good for him.
Great again. And
this is the problem. What Rome needs in order to be successful is a successful emperor who does something that benefits the empire. But if other people want the role, well, you can't be successful. We need to end that. So even when you have opportunities for success and for strengthening of the empire, somebody's going to come along and be greedy enough to end that.
His ideas, they were good. Majorian quickly took back large swaths of lost territory and dramatically reduced the corruption in the Senate. He instituted sweeping changes which made the lives of Romans much better, and in just a few short years, there was a glimmer of hope that the Western Roman Empire could possibly return to its former glory. This unexpected success pissed Ricimer off. This was not how it was supposed to go. In his mind, he was the one who would restore Rome's glory, not...
You can't have success long-term as a nation or as an empire when the people who are in leadership are more concerned about having power than about benefiting the realm.
Stupid Majorian. But before he could do anything about it, Majorian had already reclaimed most of Italy, France, and Spain, and he now planned a massive campaign to reclaim Rome's lost African territory. In preparation for this expedition, Majorian amassed a huge fleet in Cartagena, but under mysterious circumstances, the entire fleet was set ablaze just before the invasion, with whispers that Ricimer might have had a hand in it. The loss of the fleet was a huge blow, and Ricimer seized the moment and, using a combination of lies and bribes, tries to convince the Senate that Majorian was unfit to rule.
This makes me wonder if there isn't a really good alternate history scenario here in which the point of divergence is that this betrayal never happens, and that Majorian's able to stay on the throne and is able to continue to see success and bring stability to the Western Roman Empire.
Majorian, unaware of Ricimer's actions in Rome, traveled to see his old friend for advice. Majorian arrives unarmed and without guards, because why would he ever need that? This is his oldest and most trusted friend we're talking about. Well, the feelings were no longer mutual, and Ricimer and his men go out to meet Majorian on the road. Without flinching, Ricimer has Majorian arrested and kills all of his companions on the spot. He strips Majorian of his imperial clothing and then imprisoned and tortured him for 5 days.
Wow.
Throughout his time in captivity, Majorian wonders out loud why his friend would do this to him. Eventually, Ricimer had Majorian beheaded and unknowingly sealed the fate of the country he loved, as the empire would soon fall apart without a true leader. Ricimer tries to institute new puppet emperors, but they all fail, and Rome finally falls in 476. Number 2.
Wow. Yeah, it really makes me wonder if there isn't an alternate history scenario there that involves that point of divergence. That'd be interesting to look into.
Hui. For this story, we're headed to 12th century China for a legendary betrayal of one of the greatest generals in history. A boy named Yu Fei is born on a farm in southern China in the early 1100s. This is a time of great instability, as the Jurchens from the north are at war with the rulers of China, the Song dynasty. As a young child, Yu Fei's father passes away in a flood, and he's raised by his mother, who instills a fierce sense of patriotism to his country. When the Jurchens begin invading Song territory, Yu Fei, now a man, is torn between his strong desire to defend his country and his dedication to take care of his now elderly mother. His mother asks him to remove his shirt, and she tattoos on his back the words, "Serve the country with utmost loyalty."
Dang. I mean, this is like taking this to an extreme, right? But this is how serious this is. And this is so important because in most of human history, women have not been in positions where they can have direct influence over the course of world events. I mean, occasionally there are exceptions, of course. But the way that women then wield influence is often through how they influence the men in their lives, who then turn around and have influence.
Probably took up less space in Chinese. Anyways, now with his mother's blessing, Yu Fei joins the military and shows incredible skill in martial arts, weapons, and military strategy. When the Jurchens conquer the Song capital city of Kaifeng, Yu Fei joins the front lines and begins fighting on the northern battlefront. In combat, Yu Fei proves to be unstoppable. Legends of his bravery begin to emerge, and one story says he led 500 men to defeat an army of 100,000 Jurchens. He rises quickly through the ranks and soon finds himself commanding an army of loyal men known as the Yu Army, and he goes on to rack up an undefeated record against the Jurchens. What makes Yu Fei special is that throughout all the fighting, he maintains his humanity and shows extreme kindness and compassion for his soldiers. He personally tends to his wounded men, and when any of his men fell in combat, he would instruct his wife back home to send their own money to the soldier's family.
This is how you get people to fight for you, though. I mean, when the men, number one, when you're successful, men will follow you. But when the men believe that you truly do care about them and you back that up, that means a lot too. Napoleon is a perfect example of this. Julius Caesar was really good at this. Usually great leaders who achieve great victories have a combination of incredible skill, incredible bravery, but also a charisma and an ability to inspire your men to follow you.
For the next 10 years, Yu Fei and his men fought tirelessly to claw back the conquered northern Song territory, and he becomes a national hero. By 1140, he's within striking distance of the fallen capital city of Kaifeng. His dream of unifying China is now within reach. But if there's one guarantee in life, it's that success often breeds jealousy in others.
I thought he was going to say if there's one guarantee in life, it's that every time China is almost unified, it ununifies. But
as Yu Fei prepares for the final advance on Kaifeng, he receives orders to return home. See, the problem for Yu Fei is the former emperor of the northern Song dynasty was still alive and being held captive by the Jurchens. If Yu Fei was able to win and retake the city, this most likely would free the former emperor, and that would cause all kinds of problems for the current ruling class of the southern Song dynasty.
This is one of the reasons why you don't often have deposed monarchs living, because as long as they are out there, as long as they're alive, as long as they're somewhere, they can be a rallying cry for opposition. That's why usually when you win a civil war, you have to basically decapitate the leadership of your opponent.
Who would be the rightful ruler of the land? What would happen to those in power now? These were questions the officials close to the current emperor didn't want to have answered. A man named Qin Hui, a close advisor to this emperor, saw Yu Fei's growing influence as a huge threat. He convinces the emperor to make peace with the Jurchens, and just as Yu Fei is about to storm the city, the Song sue for peace and say they'll pay a tribute to the Jurchens. Yu Fei is furious upon hearing this news, but he begrudgingly follows his orders and returns south. All the land he had fought to regain is quickly recaptured by the Jurchens, and he can do nothing but watch. The fighting and the deaths of his men over the last 10 years were all for nothing. When Yu Fei returns to the capital, Qin Hui convinces the court to imprison him for conspiring against the emperor. He's thrown into a dark cell and subjected to months of torture in an attempt to force a confession. But Yu refuses to admit to crimes he never committed. Yu Fei eventually dies in prison at the age of 39. Some report that Qin Hui had him poisoned in his cell. Decades later, the truth of Qin Hui's involvement in Yu Fei's death was revealed, and statues of Qin Hui and his wife in a kneeling position were erected in front of Yu Fei's tomb as a symbol of their wrongdoing. For centuries, these statues attracted people from all across China who would come to pee and spit on the man who killed the greatest general China had ever seen. Number 3, Akechi Mitsuhide. We couldn't do a video on betrayals and backstabbing without doing at least one story from the Sengoku period in Japan. The Sengoku Jidai was a nearly 150-year civil war that took place...
And we did the extra history series on the Sengoku Jidai, if you want to check that out. Fascinating stuff, and I've mentioned many times that East Asian history is definitely a big hole in my knowledge, so a lot to be learned yet for me as well.
In 15th and 16th century Japan, where regional warlords called daimyo fought to become the great unifier of the country. In this chaos, a minor daimyo from the Owari province named Oda Nobunaga began his rise to power using erratic and unconventional tactics, which quickly proved effective on the battlefield. Now, the thing about Oda that you should know is that he wasn't like most other lords. He dressed flamboyantly and was often seen with messy, undone hair. His behavior was fairly crude compared to most daimyo. He would make fun of his men and was known to have an irrationally quick temper. For example, he once had a retainer killed on the spot when he showed up late to an important meeting. Keep all of this in mind because this is probably what gets him killed later.
Yeah, that's the problem with ruling by fear, and instead of, contrast him with the previous guy we just talked about, where you have the love of your men and men want to fight for you. I mean, there's different ways of doing this stuff, but when you rule by fear, eventually that will come back to bite you if you survive long enough. Just look at we've talked about this when talking about Joseph Stalin. Stalin ruled by fear to the point where when he was in a serious medical crisis, everybody was afraid to do anything because of fear of what would happen if he recovered and found out that they had done the wrong thing.
Anyways, this weirdness also seemed to help Oda in war, and after winning a string of decisive battles against more powerful daimyo, he began to attract powerful allies and retainers. Many began to believe he was destined to be the one to reunify Japan. Nobunaga had many trusted generals and retainers, but the two we'll be focusing on for this story are Hideyoshi Toyotomi and a man named Akechi Mitsuhide. Toyotomi was a young military genius, while Mitsuhide specialized in diplomatic relations and governance. Oda trusted and relied on Akechi to help him govern his lands and quell rebellions, and while he was very loyal in return, he was sort of the odd one of the bunch. For starters, he was much older than many of the other retainers. He was even older than Oda himself. This, combined with the fact he was more educated than Oda, all made it hard for him to handle the disrespect that Nobunaga was known for. For example, in one story, Oda grabbed Akechi around the neck and said, "I'm going to make your head into a drum," and then proceeded to bop Akechi's head with a fan while singing a song making everyone in the room burst into laughter.
How childish is that? You get the wrong person that you do that to, who themselves has a bad temper and has access to you, and it might end really badly.
But perhaps the biggest insult was the time Oda got Akechi's mother killed. In 1579, Akechi was ordered to capture Yakami Castle after the Lord Hatano Hideharu rebelled against Oda. As part of a peace agreement he negotiated, Akechi gave his mother to Hatano's men as a hostage in exchange for Hatano turning himself in with dignity. Hatano accepted the deal, and the exchange was made. Akechi's mother would stay with Hatano's men as insurance, and Hatano would travel with Akechi to see Oda to apologize. When Hatano arrives to meet with Nobunaga, he has him executed on the spot. Word of Hatano's death traveled quickly to Yakami Castle, and his men quickly kill Akechi's mother in retaliation. Now, whether or not these things were the actual reason for betrayal, we'll never know. But Akechi secretly begins to plot against Oda, and this all comes to a head in 1582. By this time, Oda has all but conquered Honshu, the main island of Japan. The last few unconquered domains are weak and will soon surrender, and Nobunaga has all of his best generals out in the field ready to crush them. He orders Akechi to take his army of around 13,000 men to support Hideyoshi against one of these last holdouts, the Mori clan. Nobunaga himself goes to Honnoji Temple to relax and prepare to join Akechi and Hideyoshi in the final glorious battle against the Mori.
False sense of security time, right? We've got it won. There's nothing to worry about. We're already kind of planning the post-war world.
Honnoji is deep within Nobunaga's territory, in Kyoto, and because of this, he doesn't feel the need for much protection. He enters the temple for his stay with virtually no guards. Early in the morning on June 21st, 1582, Akechi and his men surround the temple and without explanation begin an all-out assault. They begin slaughtering priests and Oda's companions as they make their way through the temple grounds. With virtually no guards, Oda tries to fight back, but is quickly overpowered and injured. He retreats deep into the temple to commit seppuku, but before he dies, he orders his retainer to set the temple on fire so his body will never be able to be recovered. The temple is soon engulfed in flames, and Nobunaga's body is lost amongst the ash. With Oda dead, Akechi declares himself shogun. When word of Nobunaga's death reaches Hideyoshi, he quickly makes peace with the Mori clan and heads back to find Akechi to avenge his master. I gotta go.
This is how it actually happened.
So can that guy, just kill himself? Okay. Thanks. Hideyoshi heads back to Kyoto, and Akechi is now scrambling for support. To his horror, because he cannot prove that he was the one who killed Nobunaga, no one wants to help him. Hideyoshi and Akechi fight in Kyoto at the Battle of Yamazaki, where Hideyoshi crushes Akechi's forces in just 2 hours. Akechi is killed as he tries to run away, and Hideyoshi assumes control of Oda's territory. Akechi's time as the self-proclaimed ruler of Japan lasted just 13 days. Number 4. Massacre of Glencoe.
Oh, no, not this. I've actually been to Glencoe. It's one of the most beautiful spots on planet Earth. And I'm descended from the McDonald's, so this one hits a little close to home.
This last one is crazy because George R.R. Martin has said that this was one of the inspirations for the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. It's the late 17th century Scotland, and while the area had been conquered and annexed by the British, the area known as the Highlands still remained largely run by family clans. These clans were...
Now, it's important to understand here, it wasn't conquered and annexed by the British. Scotland's king actually inherits the throne of England. After the death of Elizabeth I, her nearest relative was King James VI of Scotland. He was a great-grandson of Henry VIII's sister, so he was the nearest relative. He inherits the throne, and so for 100 years or so, you actually have two separate nations, two separate countries that are under a personal union of crowns. And so it's still a separate kingdom, but it's still under the same monarch. And then you have the Glorious Revolution, which is what leads to a lot of this stuff. When you have William and Mary come to the throne, and then it's under Queen Anne, that who's the last Stuart monarch, same dynasty that had inherited the throne of England, under which they unite them into one political entity of Great Britain. So it wasn't conquered. So what you have happening here with Glencoe and with Culloden and all of these battles is that you have a rebellion against the British crown, the Jacobite rebellion, because when the Glorious Revolution happened, now you've got a usurpation of the monarchy, and now you've got another claimant branch to the throne. So you have the government of Great Britain versus the rival claimants, the Jacobites. And that's where this is all coming from.
Were groups of people connected by a common ancestor and were ruled by a clan chief who served as the protector of his extended family. Of course, like all neighbor situations, there were disputes and the occasional "he said, she said, you stole my goat" conflicts. But generally, these clans got along.
And if you want to think of an American version of this, if you're an American, think Hatfields and the McCoys. That kind of what we call Hatfield McCoy. Oh my gosh, I'm losing. Sometimes this happens. Feud. The feuds that happened, like the Hatfields and the McCoys, or the Holbrook Underwood feud in eastern Kentucky, these were an extension of clan warfare because these were generally people of Scottish descent who settled Appalachia and brought that clan warfare mindset with them. And so what you have with these clans is you have clans that side with the Jacobites and you have clans that side with the government.
They're married to strengthen bonds and tended to trust one another as fellow Highlanders. Above all else, the Highlanders were famous for their hospitality towards guests, as it was the most ingrained and important part of their collective culture. Remember this, because that's part of what makes this betrayal so vile. So in 1688, King James is pushed out of England for being a little too Catholic.
This is a glorious revolution.
It's replaced by the Protestant King William. James flees to France, where he hopes to find support to help him reclaim his throne. This leaves his supporters, known as Jacobites, unsure of what to do in the meantime.
And why are they called Jacobites? It comes from the Latin for James, which is Jacob.
Many of the Scottish clans in the Highlands were loyal to King James, though not all of them, and this caused some division in the area. A Scotsman named John Dalrymple supported William during the Golden Revolution and is rewarded by being promoted
Glorious Revolution
to Secretary of State for Scotland, giving him authority over the land. Dalrymple does not like the Highlanders, and he knows the clans in the Highlands don't really like their new king, so he comes up with a plan to buy their loyalty. He offers the clans £12,000, a sum worth about $2.5 million today, to pledge their loyalty to their new king. This doesn't go as he planned, as the clans begin fighting over how the money should be split. The Campbells and the MacDonalds of Glencoe in particular get into it, because they have a history of cattle theft against each other and think the other family shouldn't receive any of the money. Dalrymple decides that the bribe isn't really working out, so he instead issues an ultimatum in August. Pledge your loyalty to your new king to an official sheriff by January 1st of 1692, or you will be treated as traitors to the crown and face severe consequences.
And for context, 1692 is the same year that you have the Salem witch trials happening in the United States. This is when you have the massacre of Glencoe. And for the next 50 years, you're going to have serious fighting and unrest going on in Scotland, where the British government, with some Scottish allies, but also Scottish rebels that they're dealing with, having a lot of fighting. And this is why they're going to build some of these forts like Fort George and Inverness. This is what's going to ultimately lead to the Battle of Culloden, which is just absolutely disastrous. And then eventually you're going to have these laws put in place where they're going to ban things like tartans, the kilts that identify your clan, and they're going to do the Highland clearances later, which is going to remove all of these people who are living on this land and replace them with sheep because they're more valuable. This time period dramatically transforms Scotland, and not necessarily in a positive way.
The clans don't really want to go against their sworn allegiance to King James, but James gets word and sends a message to the clans to swear the oath to William, as he can't mount an invasion in time. The clans receive this message from King James in December, and one by one, they begin pledging the oath. The MacDonalds of Glencoe, however, for some reason don't get the message until December 28th. The chief of the MacDonalds, McCain, has just 3 days to make the trek in the harsh Scottish winter to swear the oath. He makes it to a nearby fort on December 30th, hoping someone there could administer the oath, but the governor stationed there says he was not authorized to do so. The governor writes a letter explaining the situation and directs McCain to bring the letter to Sir Colin Campbell in Inverary. McCain does his best to get there in time but doesn't make the deadline. Campbell administers the oath on January 6, 1692, 7 days late. McCain returns home thinking that he and his clan are okay because, yeah, he was late, but he got the excuse note from that governor. Plus, other clans were late too, so he figured everything was good. But things were not all good. Dalrymple hears that the MacDonalds were late with their oath and decides to make an example of them. He orders Captain Robert Campbell, of the Campbell clan the MacDonalds had a long-standing cow theft feud with, to bring...
Let's literally send the worst possible person to do this. This all indicates that the intention was to kill them from the beginning. In fact, there are instructions that basically say put them all to the sword.
120 soldiers to the McDonald's home with orders for free quarter. Free quarter was the practice of offering soldiers food and shelter as a form of taxes, so McCain and the rest of the McDonald's didn't think much of it when these soldiers arrived at their doorstep. Even though Robert Campbell was from that annoying Campbell clan, his niece was married to one of McCain's sons, so they were like extended family. The McDonald's welcome in Campbell and his soldiers and treat them to exceptional Highlander hospitality. For 2 weeks, Campbell and his men are wined and dined and given the best sleeping accommodations the McDonald's had to offer. Everything seemed fine, until the morning of February 13, 1692. McCain is awoken at 5 a.m. by his servant saying the soldiers were stirring. He tells his servant to bring the soldiers some drinks and begins to get dressed so he can send off his guests. As he's putting on his pants, one of Campbell's soldiers walks in and shoots him in the back. McCain dies on the spot. The soldiers then begin to storm each home, shooting men and women and children who are still...
Yeah, this is the thing. This is not a war between soldiers. This is a massacre of civilians, many of them in their homes,
sleeping in their beds.
And a lot of the others end up fleeing, and this is February in the Highlands of Scotland, which is going to be brutal weather, and a lot of these people die of exposure.
Commotion wakes up other members of the clan, and they begin to run into the wild without food or clothing. The homes of the McDonald's are torched, and many who fled on foot freeze to death in a howling blizzard. The official numbers say the soldiers killed 38 people, but the actual number may have been much higher, as those who fled most likely died of hypothermia and were never found.
And there's a very famous song that you can find on Spotify and on Amazon and Apple Music, things like that. It's called The Massacre at Glencoe, and there are a bunch of versions of it, but it's a powerful song, and it's one that's well known there, and we learned this story in detail when we went to Glencoe. And like I said, if you ever go to Scotland, you have to go to the Highlands, and you have to go to Glencoe. It is literally, and pictures don't do it justice, it's one of those places you have to see with your own eyes. It is one of the most awe-inspiringly beautiful places you will ever see in your life, and to know what horrible things happened there. And to this day, there are places like bed and breakfasts and stuff like that if your last name is Campbell, they will not let you stay there. I mean, it is that serious 300 plus years later that they still remember. This is ingrained into their collective DNA and memories at this point. So that was good. That was interesting stories from kind of across the spectrum, ranging from the Roman Empire all the way to Scotland and East Asia in between with China and Japan. So if you have other recommendations of stories you'd like me to take a look at on this channel or any other, let me know in the comment section below. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.